I can remember when thinking 150 grand would be a big income and would be a lot of money to play with. But in the world we live in today, it's really not. One time I actually borrowed money and didn't tell my wife. That's probably the worst money decision that I've ever made. Being rich would mean... My name is John Ryan. I've been in manufacturing for just about my whole career. I work as a technical salesperson for a local manufacturing company. 50 years old. How do you define rich? Ooh, that's a great question. I've wrestled with that a lot in my life. And for me, being rich would mean being free, being out of debt and having everything paid for, and just having that amount of money that comes in to support a lifestyle that I love and allow me to do the kind of work that I really want to do. The world that we live in now is arguably the easiest time ever to become rich. And at the same time, it's very difficult for people to see that because there is so much noise. Do you have any assets that I owe money on? Just the house and property. That's the only asset that we owe any money on. The mortgage on our house stands at like $114,000. How much do you have towards retirement? So my wife has an IRA. That's a little over $100,000. I have a 401k that's got roughly $80,000 in it. Do we have a budget? The answer is yes. I've used a digital budgeting tool that I love. It's called Every Dollar. And so we're pretty religious about keeping track of things. A budget is really key. That's been a big thing for us. I stumbled into books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and then ultimately followed Dave Ramsey for quite a long time and really got on top of my finances using those methods. What is my guilty pleasure when it comes to spending? My wife and I we were addicted to the HGTV life of just doing a project every year. We foolishly got big tax returns. So if we would get a $6,000 tax return, somehow we would end up doing a $12,000 project, and now there's just more money spent or more debt. And so I would say that's the guilty pleasures, just things like tools, home improvement, supplies, things like that. And my wife and I make approximately $150,000 a year combined. The income side is roughly $8,500 a month. That's my salary plus my wife's salary. She works as a nurse. And so one of the things I would think of right off the top would be the mortgage. It's roughly $1,600. We used to budget in the neighborhood of $1,000 for groceries, and that really included a lot of things. We've gotten smarter over the years and separated out things like household items, cleaning supplies, and stuff like that. But overall, we used to try to be in the neighborhood of $1,000, and it just isn't enough. It just won't do it. That's roughly $1,500 a month. There was a time when the debt repayment would be there. We were at a point where we could get into like $2,500 a month in a good month. That's gone. So now I'm going to call it more like $2,000. It is kind of discretionary, but really that's where the retirement savings goes. So there's a lot of money that goes to retirement, or it could be funding the emergency fund. It could be funding the college fund, things like that. Utilities is a much smaller piece. I'm going to say that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $350. Phones these days aren't cheap, and I'm not drawing my slices of pie very well, but I think we're at like $180 for 3 phones. So that's myself, my wife, my daughter. There'll be a 4th one coming on. My son is 12, and he's chomping to get a phone. I'm going to say that's maybe $110. We've got a bunch of them, the Netflix, the Hulu. I use Spotify, I use Audible, so there's a chunk of money going out to that. Gas and automobile expenses, that's gotta be in the neighborhood of $500 these days. I travel around and move around a lot. There is a huge piece, and I'm showing that I don't know it as well as I should probably. That we do projects. We own a piece of property. We do a little construction. It seems like every single year. There's pool supplies. We have a category for that. There's a category for pet supplies. There's definitely, here's a big one that I forgot. This is easy. Clothing. My wife being a nurse, she has to have good clothes. My daughter, my son, there's always clothing being purchased. There's sneakers that get chewed up quickly. So that's a really big one. Folks, there must be a lot of discretionary that I'm not thinking of today. And that's how easy a budget can get away from you. What we do, we have a category that just covers prescription drugs, CPAPs, things like that. There's always medical supplies and things like that coming into the house. So that's definitely there. That's probably $200. You know, it's an interesting thing because what we talk about most of the time, the automatic categories are pretty set. It's what are we doing with that discretionary? And now that we're working to save for college and trying to save for retirement, that's where things become really tight. It makes me feel like, geez, I can remember when thinking 150 grand would be a big income and would be a lot of money to play with. But in the world we live in today, it's really not. And, you know, even with no car payments, a fairly modest mortgage payment, we don't live extravagantly. We don't take big, expensive vacations. It doesn't leave us a ton of margin, but we live a nice life. I have no complaints. What was my worst money decision? One time I actually borrowed money and didn't tell my wife. That's probably the worst money decision that I've ever made. And it was the heaviest on my heart. And so I think that ranks number one. So I remember when we got married, we made the decision to combine our finances. And that worked pretty well. If you're really trying to ultimately become wealthy, it is better and faster to do it completely together as a team. One other thing for me is my parents, they separated their finances. I remember being a kid and knowing that they didn't get along well financially. You know, my dad was an old farmer. He was a hard worker. But at some point he made a mistake with an insurance payment. And I remember my mother fired him from paying the bills. And so she took her money and went off and did her own financial plan, and he ran his, and it was not peaceful. So the best piece of financial advice that I can give would be to have a long-term approach, a long-term view of finance, and understand that if you can live below your means now and control your budget, is going to make your life so much better in the future. Finance is such a big part of our lives, and it's something that I'm passionate about. Just being a part-time financial coach, I think it's the best time ever to be alive, and the possibilities to become wealthy and do really well with your finances has never been stronger. But at the same time, the temptation and the opportunity to go into debt or the opportunity to not pay attention to your finances is equally as powerful. I just believe that if people were a little bit more open in talking about it, just in every aspect of life, your finance touches it. It does touch your health. It does touch your relationships. Don't be shy about it, because there's more information out there than ever. And there's also more bad information out there than ever. So just be careful. Finances are really important. And the older you get, the more important it becomes to get it right.